Spain once owned more gold than any empire in human history, yet it went bankrupt again and again. This is the story of how the richest empire on earth destroyed itself. Not through invasion, not through rebellion, but through gold. In the early 16th century, Spain stood at the center of the world. Its flags flew across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Its navy controlled the Atlantic. Its armies dominated battlefields from Italy to the Netherlands. No empire in history had ever expanded so quickly, and the source of this power lay across the ocean. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, they encountered civilizations already rich in precious metals. The Aztecs and Incas had mined gold and silver for centuries. To them, these metals held spiritual value. To Spain, they represented something far more powerful: money. Within decades, Spain seized control of massive mining regions in modern-day Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia. The most infamous site was Potosí, a mountain so filled with silver that it became known as the mountain that eats men. Millions of indigenous workers were forced into brutal labor. Many died underground from exhaustion, mercury poisoning, and collapsing tunnels. But their suffering created unimaginable wealth. By the mid-1500s, Spain controlled roughly half of the world's silver supply. Every year, treasure fleets crossed the Atlantic carrying tons of gold and silver, guarded by warships. These shipments financed palaces, wars, and royal courts. For a brief moment, Spain appeared unstoppable. Kings envied its wealth. Rivals feared its armies. Rome blessed its Catholic mission. Spain had everything, except an economy. Instead of using this treasure to build factories, develop agriculture, or modernize institutions, Spain chose the easier path. It spent. Luxury goods were imported from France. Weapons came from Italy. Ships were purchased from the Netherlands. Rather than building domestic industry, Spain used American silver to buy foreign products. Its empire became dependent on outside suppliers. This decision would prove fatal. At the same time, Spain became locked in near-constant warfare. It fought France for dominance in Europe. It battled Protestant rebels in the Netherlands. It clashed with England at sea. It confronted the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean. Each campaign drained enormous resources. Gold arrived, and gold disappeared. But Spain believed treasure would always save them, so they borrowed. Powerful banking families, especially the German Fugger dynasty, extended massive loans to the Spanish crown. These bankers financed wars in exchange for future silver shipments. Spain was rich on paper, but in reality, it was living on credit. By 1557, barely decades after becoming the richest empire on earth, Spain officially declared bankruptcy. Then again, in 1575. Then again, in 1596. The wealthiest empire in human history had already defaulted 3 times. Yet the treasure fleets continued to arrive, and Spain continued to spend. Then something strange began happening across Europe. Prices exploded. Food became expensive. Rent rose. Wages stagnated. This was the beginning of the price revolution, one of the first global inflation crises. Spain had flooded Europe with silver, and when too much money enters an economy, money loses value. The purchasing power of ordinary people collapsed, but Spain's royal court barely noticed. Gold kept flowing. Palaces expanded. Nobles lived in excess. The empire mistook abundance for strength. They did not realize they were consuming their future. Because while Spain relied on treasure, rival nations were building something far more powerful. They were building productive economies, and this difference would decide who ruled the world. By the late 16th century, Spain was receiving more silver than any society in history. On paper, this should have guaranteed prosperity. In reality, it created chaos. The flood of precious metal distorted markets across Europe. Prices tripled within decades. Grain became unaffordable. Housing costs surged. Workers demanded higher wages, but salaries lagged behind inflation. Spain had accidentally unleashed one of history's first monetary crises. Yet instead of recognizing the danger, Spanish leaders doubled down. They assumed wealth was permanent. They assumed conquest guaranteed security. They assumed gold could replace productivity. It could not. While Spain consumed treasure, the Netherlands and England quietly studied how money actually worked. Dutch merchants created modern banking systems. They built joint stock companies. They invested in shipyards, ports, and factories. English financiers developed credit markets and insurance. They transformed trade into an organized industry. Spain did none of this. Spanish law discouraged entrepreneurship. Nobles were exempt from taxes and viewed commerce as beneath their status. Talented citizens sought careers in the church or military rather than business. Economic innovation was culturally rejected. Spain had gold, but it had no engine. Then came the Dutch Revolt. The Netherlands had been one of Spain's most productive regions, supplying textiles, ships, and tax revenue. But heavy taxation and religious repression pushed the Dutch into rebellion. Spain responded with force. It sent armies. It built fortresses. It imposed sieges. The war dragged on for decades, draining billions in today's currency. To fund this endless conflict, Spain borrowed more. Each loan arrived with higher interest. Each payment required future silver. Spain began spending tomorrow's wealth today. Then came 1588, the Spanish Armada. King Philip II assembled one of the largest naval forces ever created, intending to invade England and restore Catholic control. The fleet sailed north. Storms scattered the ships. English firepower finished the rest. Over a third of the Armada was destroyed. Thousands died. Vast fortunes sank beneath the waves. Europe watched in shock. Spain was no longer invincible. At the same time, pirates and privateers targeted treasure fleets. English raiders like Francis Drake intercepted shipments. Hurricanes destroyed convoys. Entire cargoes vanished. Spain's economy depended on fragile wooden ships crossing dangerous oceans. One storm could erase a year's revenue. This was not a financial system. It was gambling. Meanwhile, rival nations were doing something smarter. They used Spanish silver to build their own industries. England invested in coal mining and metallurgy. The Dutch dominated global shipping. France reorganized taxation and centralized authority. Spain paid its competitors to replace it. And still, Spain refused to adapt. Instead of investing in agriculture or manufacturing, Spanish elites purchased imported luxury goods. Instead of building domestic banks, they relied on foreign lenders. Instead of developing middle-class institutions, they preserved aristocratic privilege. Their wealth created complacency. Then came the deeper rot. Religious purges expelled Jews and Muslims from Spain, communities that had been central to trade, medicine, craftsmanship, and finance. Hundreds of thousands of skilled workers were forced out. Spain erased its own productive class. It was economic self-sabotage. By the early 17th century, Spain's financial structure resembled a pyramid. New loans paid old debts. Silver shipments serviced interest. Tax revenue barely covered government salaries. The empire had become addicted to external money. And addictions always end the same way, collapse. Yet Spain still believed it could outspend reality, because it had gold. But gold was no longer building power. It was hollowing the empire from within. By the mid-17th century, Spain's decline could no longer be hidden behind treasure fleets. The silver still arrived from the Americas, but it no longer brought prosperity. It brought dependency. Spain had spent more than a century consuming wealth instead of creating it. Workshops closed. Textile production collapsed. Small manufacturers disappeared. Entire regions that once produced goods for Europe became stagnant. Spanish cities lost population as people fled in search of opportunity elsewhere. The empire was hollowing out. While Spain stagnated, England and the Netherlands surged forward. They built commercial fleets. They founded global trading companies. They established modern banks and insurance markets. They reinvested profits into infrastructure and innovation. Spain did none of this. Spanish nobles avoided commerce because status mattered more than productivity. Government positions were sold. Corruption became institutional. Being wealthy meant living off royal pensions or land rents. Economic ambition was treated as vulgar. The middle class, the engine of modern economies, never developed. Spain had created an empire without building a nation. Even worse, Spain's political system actively discouraged reform. Royal advisors feared change. Religious authorities suppressed new ideas. Merchants faced heavy regulation. Entrepreneurs struggled under outdated laws. Instead of adapting to the industrial age, Spain clung to feudal traditions. Then came demographic collapse. Plagues swept through cities. Agricultural yields declined. Heavy taxation forced farmers off their land. Young men joined the military or left for colonial adventures. Spain exported its labor force. The countryside emptied. Food shortages became common. Meanwhile, debt consumed everything. By the late 1600s, interest payments absorbed much of the royal budget. The state struggled to pay soldiers. Naval vessels rotted in harbors. Military technology fell behind rivals. Spain was still fighting wars with outdated systems. Its enemies were evolving. Spain was aging. Portugal broke away from Spanish control. France seized territory. The Dutch secured independence. One by one, Spain's possessions slipped away. Not through decisive battles, through slow erosion. The empire that once terrified Europe now struggled to govern itself, and beneath it all lay the same problem. Gold had replaced discipline. Treasure had replaced planning. Spain had mistaken wealth for strength. But wealth without structure is fragile. The silver that once fueled conquest now financed decay. Spain had become trapped in what economists later called the resource curse. When nations discover easy wealth, they often abandon productive development. They overspend, they import, they borrow, they lose competitiveness. Eventually, the money stops. And when it does, there is nothing underneath. That was Spain. Its empire had grown fat on treasure, but it had starved its institutions. It had neglected education. It had failed to modernize governance. It had avoided building a sustainable economy. By the early 18th century, Spain was no longer shaping global events. It was reacting to them. Its influence had shifted northward. Power now rested in London, Amsterdam, and Paris. Spain remained a shadow of its former self. Its empire survived on maps, but its leadership role was gone. Spain had not been defeated by a superior army. It had been overtaken by superior systems. The world was entering the age of industry. Spain was still living in the age of extraction, and history does not wait for those who refuse to adapt. By the early 18th century, Spain's transformation was complete. What had once been the most powerful empire on earth was now a secondary European state. The treasure fleets still sailed, but their cargoes were smaller. The mines of the Americas were declining, and Spain's debts remained. The empire had lost its momentum. Britain now ruled the seas. The Netherlands dominated trade. France controlled continental politics. Spain watched from the sidelines. Its empire still existed, but its influence was gone. The collapse had not come from invasion. It had come from inside. Spain had failed to understand the nature of real power. Gold does not build nations, people do. Institutions do. Innovation does. Spain had substituted treasure for development. It used silver to fund wars instead of factories. It financed luxury instead of education. It preserved aristocracy instead of entrepreneurship. Every shipment of gold postponed reform. Every loan delayed accountability. By the time Spanish leaders realized their mistake, the world had moved on. Their industries were gone. Their skilled workers had emigrated. Their rivals had surpassed them. Spain became a textbook example of what economists now call the resource curse. Countries that discover vast natural wealth often grow weaker, not stronger. Easy money creates complacency. Complacency creates waste. Waste creates decline. You see this pattern repeated throughout history. In ancient Rome, in imperial Spain, in oil-rich states, and even in modern economies, sudden wealth distorts priorities. Governments stop investing in people. They stop building resilient systems. They begin relying on extraction rather than creation. Spain's fall offers a simple but brutal lesson. Money without discipline destroys nations. Wealth without productivity creates dependency. Power without responsibility leads to decay. Spain did not lose its empire in a single battle. It lost it slowly. Through inflation, through debt, through cultural stagnation, through refusing to adapt. The gold that once made Spain feared eventually made it fragile. And this story still matters today, because modern societies face similar temptations. Easy credit, resource windfalls, short-term growth, political vanity projects. History shows what happens when nations mistake money for strength. They consume instead of build. They borrow instead of reform. They delay change until it becomes impossible. Spain believed its treasure would last forever. It did not. Empires do not collapse when they become poor. They collapse when they forget how to produce. They collapse when they stop investing in human capital. They collapse when they allow wealth to replace work. The Spanish Empire ruled half the world, yet it failed the simplest test of sustainability. And that is the dark truth behind its collapse.